Hi everybody, my name is Abby Montgomery. I teach English at Blue Ridge. I'm one of the members of the grant group who has other commitments and is not able to be there today. I wish I could be there with all of you. And I prepared this video and worked with Gretchen to just share a little bit about my experience and my perspective coming into this and to put out that contact information for a potential assignment writing partner. So just a tiny little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's in English from Washington Only University and a master's in English from Penn State University. So you can see between WNL and now being at Blue Ridge, I've spent a lot of the last going on 20 years here in the Shenandoah Valley. And I have 12 total years of college teaching experience, and 10 of those years I've been using rubrics to guide and evaluate writing, and I'll talk a little bit about that transition and how that feeds my continuing interest in things like this grant project. So in my own experience as a student, I had rubrics in high school, breakdowns of points for this category, points for that category, here's what to do. And then I went to college and we had very minimal assignment directions and we'd get narrative comments. And as an English major and then somebody who was taking a lot of history classes and things, I feel like I had a pretty representative experience from a lot of different professors. And that was just kind of the way it was. Here's your assignment, and then you're going to get a letter grade, and you're going to get a narrative comment. And the narrative comments didn't always necessarily have a lot to do with what was actually in the assignment. And I don't think this was particularly intentional on my professor's part. And I was someone who did well, but I was also someone who'd had very good high school preparation and someone who would go to office hours and ask a lot of questions. And I remember at times feeling uncomfortable that I was getting rewarded for something maybe that I'd learned in office hours or that had been mentioned in passing in class, and I really happened to pick up on it, and I thought, hey, why didn't you make that clear to everybody? But I was a young student. I thought, okay, this is how it is in college. And then I went on to grad school, and there was no communication of standards, nothing whatsoever. And that's fair enough. I'm in a non-quantitative field, and there tend to be a lot of factors that influence research and publication in my field that don't have to do with the content and don't have to do with any kind of measurable standards. So in that way, it was fair enough. But it also spilled over into our undergraduate teaching. As graduate students, we were also teaching assistants. Really, it was a lectureship. We were in charge of our own classes, and we had this departmental list of very vague descriptors for an A paper, a B paper, a C paper, and we were handed those, and those were the grading standards, and students would complain and students would challenge, and I thought at the time, well, this is how you grade in college. And I kind of looked at it and I said, okay, I'm a young female instructor. These are students who got to the flagship state university as freshmen. They have certain expectations that I'm maybe the first one to disabuse them of, and I went on from there. And then after grad school, I actually left academe for a year, but I found my way back into the classroom. And I was adjuncting at a branch campus of my graduate institution, a community college and a small private college. That was to start with. I ended up teaching at several different institutions, but many institution types and many preparation levels. And in those cultures, people were using rubrics. And when I first began to use rubrics again, it was kind of a selfish benefit. I thought, oh good, now I'll have these quantitative things to put down next to the grades and I will have that kind of cover. But the more I thought about it, certainly there are conveniences for me associated with using rubrics, but it is so much more for my students. I'm not assuming that my students have the kind of background that I did and the kind of advantages that I did. And since I can't and really shouldn't assume that, my focus in all of my rubrics has been to provide guidelines. Here's a detailed description of what you're going for, of what the norm here is, what an academic paper in this context should do and should look like. And it's very important to me that I'm making that transparent. Again, I'm not assuming that all of my students have the background I did, and I'm not assuming that everybody has the social skills to kind of interpret my every statement, or in a commuter setting, the time or the courage to come to office hours and really kind of trick me into telling them what I want, which I feel like was sometimes my experience with my own professors. And looking back, I just almost feel guilty about having been rewarded for that. And so I put it all on paper. Here you go. Same for everybody. This is what you're aiming for. Now try your best. And I had the opportunity earlier this year to do some research also into the use of rubrics, and I wanted to just put that out into our conversation as well, that it's almost a professional duty. We must provide that guidance because we have that kind of enculturation into our academic disciplines, but our students do not. And that, yes, absolutely, there are benefits for the professor. If there are those of you who are considering being involved in the project who maybe have not had a lot of experience with rubrics, it has definitely made my life easier over the last several years. I taught an absurd number of classes per semester when I was an adjunct, and I have ended up teaching a lot of overload the last several years at Blue Ridge, and just within that schedule, I don't know that I would be able to function as well and give my students any kind of feedback without that tool there to help me organize the feedback. And you see in the quote from Rocco, there's that quote again, transparency. You don't have to guess what I want. This is not some sort of fairy tale. I'm going to tell you. And some other researchers have looked at just being respectful of our students by helping them, being respectful of their time. I know when I've been in situations, either professional or academic, when that information isn't clear, I have to spend a lot of my time kind of chasing after people and getting them to tell me what they should have already told me. And the second quote there, definitely do make assessment uniform. Everybody gets the same 25 points for the introduction. Everybody gets the same 10 points for the research sources and the same 10 points for their citation mechanics. There's not any kind of slide there that if you do something really well, you're going to get maybe rewarded more than other students, or that if you do something just really badly, maybe you'll get downgraded more than other students. And again, I feel, especially with so many students, that it's kind of a necessary tool for that fairness. And again, that last quotation from the United States Distance Learning Association, again, that it is public, it's transparent, it's not just for the students who are like 19-year-old Abby who will go spend an hour in office hours. It's for everyone to have the same knowledge of what's expected in the assignment. Because then what's up to them is, all right, how well can you do it? It's like running a race. Everybody runs the same 100 meters, 1,500 meters, whatever it is, and how fast can you go? But you know ahead of time you're running 1,500 meters. And I wanted also to share with you some of my current rubrics. So the screen may jump a bit here as I navigate over to them. I apologize for that. So here we go to Microsoft Word. And this is the argument, or this is the rubric for kind of the capstone essay in our English 111 course. You see I give them a page of descriptive guidelines. Here's what you're doing, here's some background, here are some suggestions, and I give them some almost theoretical guidance, then here are the source requirements, and then all that is broken out in a rubric. And I used to just provide this descriptor and the total points in a rubric and then would kind of give some narrative comments. And I found over the years that I was writing a lot of the same things over and over, so I might as well say them in the same way to everybody. So now I've got it broken out into these different levels, different point values that are going to tell you what column you land in, which of these situations may describe your paper. So again, same amount of credit for everybody for every part, no surprises, no wiggles. And then I do leave some space at the end if somebody does something unusual that I want to make maybe a different kind of comment for that doesn't fit into the general class framework. I have that. And then this is English 112, our Comp 2 course, the essay on a novel, with, again, number of sources, some theoretical guidelines, some thematic guidelines. Here's what you might want to do. Here's some more information about how you do it. And then, again, there is the nuts and bolts. Here is how you're going to be graded. Here's what you're aiming to do. And on we go from here. And then for us, what constitutes an upper level class is the 200 level lit courses. So they're your typical survey and Brit Lit or American Lit. And I do teach these as writing intensive classes as well. And for me, this has been the attempt to take that rubric structure and modify it to another sort of class. You see, I have the same theoretical descriptions, general parameters, and then some suggestions for topic guidance. But then in the rubric, I have shifted my focus. The idea is, all right, you've been through the prerequisites. You should know a lot of that about the manuscript format and the essay structure, so I'm not going to give you so much of the credit about that, but I'm going to plant a lot of the credit on the research requirement and your depth of use of that research. And I'm going to plant 3 grade levels on how deep do you go? How thoroughly do you analyze? Are you really providing that argumentative content? And it does prevent arguments. You see here, having those required secondary sources is 30 of the 40 points. And even into a literature course, there are people who will use things that aren't journal articles, but they look at it and they say, yeah, I knew. Wow, that was a screw up. And it's allowed me to really kind of push those standards, but without doing it in a way that changes the classroom dynamic where they feel like, oh geez, I'm going to get hammered for the slightest little thing. Well, I told you ahead of time. You knew you were supposed to do this. So in a sense, you hammered yourself. So for me, it has been a pretty much uniformly positive experience. I think for my students, it's also been a pretty positive experience. So there are my references and there is my contact information. I'll just kind of leave that up where you can pause the video, and I look forward to working with someone.